Welcome to the conference, everyone. Great to see all of you. And I'm actually here with my great friend, Nili Gilbert, who is really a force of nature. I met her actually at the World Economic Forum. We're both young global leaders. We met about 7 years ago, and we've been on this journey ever since together. I'm just so privileged to be having this conversation with her today.
It's great to be here with you, Karen. And we're still holding on to the young and that young global leader title.
I think we might be transitioning to OGL pretty soon, but for now we're still young at heart. So this conversation, I think we have about 19 minutes left. We have a few topics, I think really from a practitioner standpoint in terms of, how do we think about these topics of energy transition? How do we really think about sustainable finance? As someone who's doing this day to day, I run the global sustainable finance business at Bank of America. We have to deploy $1.5 trillion, not just peanut butter around. We have to do it with a lot of intention, a lot of precision. And working with Nili, I think you did a lot with Gfans, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. We really are on a lot of coalition together for Movers Coalition, which we can talk about. But just talk to us, first of all, about, this journey. You were in asset management, you were in alternative asset management. When I met you, we were both sort of Wall Street bankers kind of doing conventional finance. And I know at the time, it caught my attention, you were talking about patient capital. Patient capital can be directed to do good things. So just tell us about the journey of your finance journey and how you landed to be the vice chairwoman of Carbon Direct, which is one of the leading companies that's doing carbon removal and reduction strategies.
Well, thank you so much for asking. I was actually just 22 years old back in the Aughties when I first had this realization that capital is driving outcomes on the ground around the world, including across the types of values around sustainability and justice that we all care about. And that was when I came into the finance sector. And I always say, many people here have heard me say, that if we can change the markets, we can change the world. For many years, I started in 2006 chairing my first investment committee for the Rockefeller family. I'm still today chairing 2 of the family's investment committees and sit on a 3rd. And that was when I first started getting to work on mission-driven investing, which pushed into ESG. And now we're pushing hard on net zero, which is how I come into the leadership of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. But for a long time, these were really 2 different paths. You and I were both in kind of hardcore traditional finance, where I was a global macro hedge fund manager, and you were and still are a leader in global markets. And I would always feel like I had to introduce myself with 2 hats. Lately, these 2 worlds are really coming together, and the financial sector is pushing hard on building the climate solutions and new green technologies that we need. And that's what ended up bringing me to Carbon Direct, was a desire to move even beyond just ESG into deep transformation of the global economy in line not only with our net zero goals, but also the ones that we have around climate justice.
That makes tremendous
How about you?
Sense. Well, I think, as you said, I started as a trader in equity derivatives, and I moved down to be structuring and doing different types of sales and trading businesses and leading large businesses and frontline P&L. But my heart was always in things that I think will last generations. So when we first met in Davos, I think the conversation was around, what do you do? And I felt like I only really wanted to talk about the wind farms and solar farms and the EV projects that I was financing. And that's where the pride went. And when people ask me what I do, that's what I gravitated towards. So eventually, when this job becomes a full-time dedication for the whole company, across 8 lines of business, that's truly a dream come true. And I have great partners and great teammates at the company. And this is in our DNA. And so to do that at Bank of America is a privilege. So let's talk about coalition. So everyone here probably knows Gfans at COP26. the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, talked about the $130 trillion that we collectively represented across different pillars: banks, insurance companies, asset managers, asset owners, service providers. This commitment to net zero is obviously a very important first step. I think since COP26, the Gfans, for us, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, we are really working diligently around frameworks. What do we measure? What do we disclose? How do we really follow a science-based pathway to make sure we have interim targets until we reach 2050? Rome is not building one day. You can't just have a 30-year goal without having annual and 5-year and 10-year goals. That's obviously been underway. And two is really to scale up and expand a lot of the things that we're doing, mature technologies, but also really catalyze and incubate a lot of new things that really need to drive this transition, which a lot of those technologies, as you know, given your role in Gfans, has not really materialized. Just talk to us about your view of Gfans, given your tremendous contribution to Gfans with Mark Carney and Michael Bloomberg and the leadership there. And just tell us about how Gfans, which interestingly still has Glasgow in its name, how is that going to sort of evolve into COP27 and 28 and beyond and carry this coalition in a very effective manner, right? Because the naysayers would say coalition, consensus-driven approach, that's usually leads to slow progress. So what do you really think about that?
First of all, we're going to keep Glasgow in the name throughout the future COPs. For Gfans, I chair the advisory panel of technical experts that advises Gfans and its standards. So you're all welcome for the over 100,000 words of communications that we just put out on those standards. And I also sit in the principals group, so that's the leadership group of Gfans. When I think about coalition efforts to be able to solve climate change, one way to think about it is that climate change is really an ecosystem problem. And so as leaders, I believe that we need to organize ourselves as an ecosystem to be able to meet it and match it. Within that ecosystem, because the problems related to climate change are so diverse, I also believe that we need diverse leadership across our coalitions to be able to figure out this problem. So this means within Gfans, although it's a finance sector coalition, we're very focused, and Mark talked about this during his remarks, we're very focused on what we can do to partner with and drive sector-specific transitions where the emissions are on the ground in the real world. So partnering the way that you do with your clients on their goals. Also, when it comes to diversity, if you look at how we're organized, our founding vision at Carbon Direct, we have a huge team of scientists. We have finance. We have technologists. We work with amazing entrepreneurs. We work on public policy issues. So again, coalitions, combined diverse efforts so that we organize ourselves as an ecosystem to meet the ecosystem problem. I know there are a lot of coalitions. We're about to talk about another one in a minute. Sometimes people say, are there too many coalitions? Are there too many efforts? Because some of the challenges that we have ahead of us, we don't know exactly how we're going to get there. I actually believe that there are benefits to having many shots on goal as we try to figure it out. I see it like a cone. Today, there's a limited range of options that we know we can pursue to get to net zero. And as we get closer and closer to 2050, that range is going to narrow and we'll focus our efforts. And I believe that the various efforts across many different coalitions will come to align because we're going to figure out what we need to do in order to land this plane on time with sustainable aviation fuel.
I like the many shots on goal. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think the approach is for someone to say, this is the way you do energy transition, this is the only way to go, or you just have to put all your eggs in one basket and bet on green hydrogen. This is how you produce green hydrogen. I think there's different pathways. And when I look through the pathways of each new technology that we're focused on, whether it's carbon capture and sequestration, whether it's looking at green hydrogen, whether it's looking at biofuels and sustainable aviation fuels, there's so many ways of getting there. And I do think the emissions carbon intensity will come down over time. I do think that's the scientists and the NGOs, the governments and the philanthropic institutions and the private sector can really work together. Sometimes I think, when you let pessimism take your focus and you start to think, wow, this is just, we're not going to agree on anything. But I do think, when you think about these tangible projects and tangible, technologies that are being funded, the capital raise on some of these newer technologies, despite macro market headwinds, are still very, very strong. The capital pipeline is still very, very strong for these technologies. So despite all the greenwashing attacks and people's skepticism, I do think the global consensus that these technologies, main technologies, some of them we talked about, have to be supported. And we have to really try different pathways to get to the most optimal pathway.
Well, you've been driving that capital pipeline at the top of a lot of green league tables at Bank of America. So thank you for your leadership in this.
Yeah, we won't get it perfect every step of the way, but we're going to keep going. I think we're going to go with our own balance sheet. We're going to go with our clients' capital. We're going to really drive capital markets to be more evolved as well. It's not just green bonds and social bonds and sustainability bonds. I do think there are additional instruments, and blended finance, maybe a cliche. It has to come in. The capital structure has to be de-risked across different participants that have different risk return and impact metrics and goals. So let's talk about First Movers Coalition. First Movers Coalition, we were actually one of the founding members, and some of my colleagues here with us, we were there from the start, which is really looking at these hard-to-abate sectors. The hard-to-abate sectors are really difficult to tackle, right? Wind and solar doesn't just cut it. You have to have these technologies to really decarbonize the transportation sector, right? Trucking, shipping, aviation, and the metal sector, aluminum, steel, and the industrial sector like concrete. So Carbon Direct just became an implementation partner. So welcome to the club.
Thank you.
And tell us what Carbon Direct is going to do with your 50+ scientists and the rigor that you put into carbon math.
Well, we're super passionate about the implementation word in implementation partner. One of the amazing things when you think about the challenges and opportunities ahead for the hard-to-abate sectors that you just described is that in general, it's not that we don't know what we need to do to decarbonize them. It's not that we need to have new scientific discoveries. What's really required at this point is the scientific and technical expertise as it intersects with finance and public policy to be able to scale up these technologies to the level that we need by 2030. First Movers Coalition sector objectives focus on 2030 targets for procurement across all of these industry pillars. And when you think about it, we really need to get the model right for implementation of these kinds of deals and solutions by 2030 to be able to really ramp up the slope of scale of the transition from there. So just by way of background, for those who may not yet be familiar with First Movers Coalition, this is a public-private partnership co-founded at COP26 between World Economic Forum and the U.S. State Department under the leadership of Secretary John Kerry, and with many founding members, a handful of founding members, including Bank of America, and also shout out to Rich Lesser from BCG, who was just on the stage. At Davos this year, First Movers Coalition announced a great expansion. It now is representing companies who have market cap that is over 10% of the global market cap already, and additional governments whose GDP is more than 50% of global GDP. So when we talk about this ecosystem solution to solve ecosystem problems, it's really these massive coalitions of demand signal and policy response to be able to move the needle in the dramatic fashion that we need. At Carbon Direct, we're so honored to be focused on implementation of those goals with a special passion for the carbon dioxide removal pillar.
Yeah, we're super excited about CDR as well. Now you need another acronym, carbon dioxide removal, because that's obviously, considered more, has more integrity than carbon reduction, but obviously we need both. I'm always saying it's not the or, it's the both, it's the end. And I think the CDR, look, we're looking at a lot of direct air capture projects right now. We're looking at a massive, one of the largest carbon capture and sequestration projects in the United States. When we look at the potential and the size and just the millions and millions of tons of CO2 it can actually really remove and sequester permanently underground, that gets us really excited. right? Because when you think about a lot of the, I mean, we're going to go through carbon math. I do think you should go through carbon math. We're 53 gigatons. How much could be actually removed, nature-based, engineered? I think that math is super, super important. Not to get geeky here, but I think the nature-based technologies and the engineered approaches need to coexist, right? I think people like to say, this is the way to go. We got to have both nature and engineered approach. And CDR is obviously, again, you could look at nature-based and you could look at engineered and technology-based. So what is Carbon Direct's sort of one-liner in terms of what you should think about in terms of when you think about CDR and what you should do, as a first step in your corporate net zero journey?
The one-liner is that there is no pathway to limit global warming significantly below 2 degrees without both nature-based and engineered carbon removal based upon how far we've already overshot our high ambition goals for reductions alone. You're so right. We always have to focus on the fact that 80% of the decarbonization goal ahead of us will and must come from reductions. And so this is some of the work that we're talking about in terms of innovation to decarbonize our activities. But when you think about the 53 gigatons of emissions that we're putting out every year, even after that 80%, there's still going to be about 10 gigatons of residual emissions that we're going to need to remove from the air. Now, nature is super important in this. Nature is a natural carbon sink. Our forests, healthy soil, the oceans. Climate scientists, depending on which ones you ask and how you think that our relationship with nature will be able to improve over time, they estimate that nature-based removals will be able to account for 2 to 4 gigatons of that 10. But this means that the remaining, we will need to focus on dramatically scaling up also our engineered carbon removal technologies to do the rest. That is in a high ambition IPCC pathway, P1, P2, where we actually manage to limit the emissions that we're putting out today, having just reached peak emissions and peak coal use again last month. We're going to need to limit that and then actually decarbonize at the 7 to 8% that's required. To the extent that we overshoot, we're unfortunately going to have to remove even more. And so when you think about engineered removals, you have technologies like direct air capture. You also have biomass with carbon removal and storage, and also rocks, carbon mineralization. We can accelerate the natural tendency of rocks to sequester carbon over time.
Absolutely. Those are the technologies, again, may not be economical today, and then typical capital markets and financing may not go there. But I think with the different types of capital and different types of risk return impact objectives, that's precisely what we're working on. And I do think public policy helps, right? So when you look at, Section 45 in the United States, when you look at carbon capture tax credits, those things help. Wind and solar would not be at the scale in the United States today without those ITC, PTCs that were introduced over a decade ago. And obviously we want to see those extend as well. So I think that's a way that government could help. But I think, policy clarity and policy stability on these incentives, or frankly, sticks are fine too, right? So, if you don't give us carbon tax, that's a stick that we all frankly need to level the playing field. And these are the carrots that we could really use and try to incentivize and boost the scale and the speed.
Amen to that.
So, amen to that. A minute and a half left. Let's talk about a topic I'm sure everyone has talked about, but I know you have some unique insight on just transition. And both of us, when we think about, the work that we did for World Economic Forum as young global leaders, so much of what we felt and were inspired by was this: the world needs to be a more equitable place. Not because it's a slogan, because it's just better. It's better for everyone. It's better for, really, frankly, the human spirit. So when you think about emerging markets and you think about transition being just and equitable, and that's, again, you have to translate that into very, very tangible projects in emerging markets. And when we think about the just transition and doing this globally, right? Because we can't do this in OECD countries and get to net zero.
Yes.
So I know you just were in Doha, and talk to us about your perspective on just transition and how do we really do this perfectly?
Well, When I was in Doha, it was very valuable to be able to meet with leaders from across the Middle East and Africa to really understand their perspective on where we are in this energy transition, and the challenges that, the specific local challenges that they face. I don't think that we're going to be able to achieve net zero without also focusing on a just transition within it. And that's because we have to go to where the emissions are. When you think about place-based climate action, it takes you immediately into engaging with communities and understanding their needs and how to lift the whole system at the same time. At Carbon Direct, we're soon to announce a new full-time hire of climate justice. And this is because we realize, thank you. And this is because we realize that as focused as we are on carbon emissions, in order to be able to move that needle, we have to support the whole thing at once. This means when we're investing with companies, we need to understand how they are advancing social issues in their work as well and support them in that. When we're advising clients or reviewing projects on their behalf, make sure that we're listening to communities, learning from their indigenous wisdom. There are communities that have been driving nature-based solutions literally for thousands of years. We need to understand their wisdom and support them in their leadership. We want not only to sit in a skyscraper in Manhattan and push perspectives of climate justice around the world, but to pull from the grassroots and understanding what best practices are and build the necessary bridges. And so thank you for asking about the just transition and also for leading in it through your work on blended finance and beyond, because whether we come at the sustainable development goals from environmentalism, from social justice or other topics, I don't think we'll be able to solve any of the 17 goals without thinking about them all at once.
Absolutely. And I do think that means we have to think about the OECD countries' cumulative emissions, right, versus emerging market cumulative emissions. We have to be sympathetic to the argument about emissions per capita. We've got to think about community sort of distribution, access to these climate finance and as well as technologies. And I am an optimist. I always think, hey, fintech helped a lot of emerging markets leapfrog in the financial world. And I really do hope climate tech and these green, newer technologies that we all need to support can actually help emerging markets leapfrog the climate transition dialogue as well. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and wisdom with all of us. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.